This is the one in which I debate fellow lefty and Twitch streamer Whick, aka DeathOfCertainty, about centrist both sides rhetoric, political escalation, and the filibuster. So please hit that like and subscribe below. Be sure to follow DeathOfCertainty on Twitch and enjoy the show.
So just for my audience's sake, how I came to know you even existed is I saw you on NotSoErudite stream, right? I saw your debate with Eucharist and Taft-Dash, both of which I have talked to before and both of which I respect. I disagree with them on quite a few issues, right? Especially Taft-Dash, but Eucharist especially is someone that I've really respected for a long time. And I had some issues, right? With what you said. I put them in chat. You put me on blast on Twitter. We had a little back and forth, but I figured, you know what? We're never going to get anywhere like on Twitter. That's just not the format that leads to interesting conversation. And I wanted to bring you on and talk to you not only about that conversation, but about a wide variety of topics, kind of get your take, find out how you have arrived at the political positions you have, and maybe we can kind of figure out where we agree, where we disagree, what bridges can be built, things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, so I talked to Taft-Dash. That was my second time, and I really, really like her. She is probably, with the exception of counterpoints, maybe. But actually, this is fairly, I guess, low-hanging fruit because they're the only two, other than like Rob Noor and Lecture Fan, that I know. She's my favorite conservative commentator on Twitch and YouTube that I'm familiar with, because I think that she takes great pains to, I mean, not only is she highly educated, right, and she knows quite a bit, she's not a cookie cutter Republican. You know, she didn't vote for President Trump in 2020. She said that on stream, so I don't think I'm, revealing any dark secret there. She voted for Joe Biden, and she doesn't intend to vote Republican in this election. She's probably going to abstain. And when I see her in panels, she's, even though she defends a kind of right-wing view, it is considerably more nuanced and thoughtful than the standard conservative line now, because I don't think that and I think would be the first to admit, there's not much by way of a robust right-wing intellectual movement at this point. So she distinguishes herself in a major way from Republicans. And I'd never talked to Eucharist before, except when I'd never even heard of him until NotSoErudite put us in touch. And he and I talked a bit through DMs. I liked him even more after we had that panel. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought they were both very thoughtful and very unique relative to most right-wingers.
So, I guess we're going to start, right? I'm
Sure.
going to start. I think that this view is backwards, right? I think there's the norm, not the exception in general. What I think we've done, right, is we've elevated the crazies on the right wing. So if you are on the left wing, right, if you are a Democrat, or if you are a liberal, or if you are even a leftist, the way social media has worked is we engage with the craziest, most extreme, the things that make us angry, right? And so those reasonable voices, even though I would argue are, if not the majority, they are a much bigger piece of the pie than we are giving it credit for on the left. And it's, yeah. Well, my last guest, Tiberius D, he's conservative, right? He's center right, and he's very reasonable. We have, again, he's disaffected with Trumpism. He's mentioned a lot of the same problems you did with the lack of intellectualism when it comes to who the right is choosing on as their standard bearers. But when it comes to the rank and file, right? One of the things that bothers me on the left is that we are so quick to say, well, the Republicans are the party of anti-science. The Republicans are the party of stupid. The Republicans are uneducated. The Republicans are, all these pejoratives. And I think that it does us a disservice when we do that, because there are many conservatives, such as Taft-Dash, such as Eucharist, such as Tiberius D, such as Ranger and Rogue, such as, I hate to say it, even Fabian Liberty, right, who's not a conservative, but he's kind of a crazy libertarian. He's not dumb. It would be a mistake to say that he is dumb. And when people in my family, because I live in a very Republican rural area, see people talk like that, it just makes them disbelieve everything else that comes out of their mouth, because a majority of them are not crazy. A majority of them are not these kind of caricatures that we paint. And that's one of the problems I had with this debate you had with Eucharist and Taftash, is it felt like these Twitter talking points, these caricatures of what right wing is. And I think if we are to successfully push back against the right wing, we need to understand who they are, who they actually are, what they actually believe, what they actually espouse. Because if we are pushing back against the character, if we're fighting ghosts, it's going to make us look it's going to make us look like liars. And I'm not calling you a liar, and I don't mean to imply that by any stretch of the imagination. But I'm telling you, like, the people in my family who die hard, dyed in the wool Republicans have been for life, look at it and this is what they are seeing and this is what they're saying. But I talked a lot there. Feel free to respond. Go ahead.
No problem. Yeah, so I think that, and it's entirely possible that I did not present myself to the best of my ability, but it's also, I think there's like a misunderstanding here. So I also grew up in a red state. I currently live in a red state, and I've lived, with the exception of the past 5 years of my life, I lived in rural parts of red states. So I was born in rural Pennsylvania, and I've lived most of my life in rural Kentucky. Okay, so most of my family members and friends are conservative, and they are Republican. I've got 4 sisters, as far as I know. They've all voted Republican. Step parents, things like that. My late mother voted Republican. So I am more familiar with Republicans as a matter of osmosis and like reach out and touch than I am Democrats by far. So I am well aware of who Republicans are, both on the fringes and the rank and file voters. 31 years spent in close proximity with them, both North and South, and, mid-America and East Coast. So I've gotten all kinds of conservative flavors, Christian and non-Christian as well. So, yeah, I'm pretty familiar with that, and that's part of the reason why I'm as confident as I am to make diagnoses about the Republican Party. I don't think Republican voters are all stupid. I don't think that they're all bad or that they're all fascist. I mean, again, if that were the case, then pretty much everyone in my family and 60 to 70% of my friends, I'd have to write off, and I don't. I love them dearly, and many of them are highly intelligent. I think in many cases they're ignorant, right? And I do mean ignorant not in the Southern pejorative of stupid.
I get you.
Yeah, but uneducated on the policies that matter. And again, who can blame them? They didn't go to school to study it. They don't sit and watch C-SPAN or have it like NPR on in the background. They get, while raising kids, while, working jobs that are not at home, while having pets and doing all these things. I'm the only one in the family who doesn't have kids, for example. So like all the demands of their lives, and then just a lack of interest in it. So I don't fault them for it. But what they're getting is, social media memes, Tucker Carlson sound bites, Laura Ingraham, etc. and so forth. So no, it's not my goal to demonize rank and file voters, and that's why I tried to say in that conversation multiple times, there's a difference between the rank and file Republican and the movers and shakers of the Republican Party. There is a world of difference between a Donald Trump and Bubba down the street, or Billy Joe, or Susie, or whoever it is. There's a world of difference. And I think it's okay to distinguish these two and say, okay, the Mitch McConnells, the Lindsey Grahams, the Ted Cruzes, the Donald Trumps, the Ron DeSantises, they are bad actors. They are bad faith actors. They are corrupt. They are pushing bad policies. And they're corroding institutions by breaking norms and doing all kinds of things because they don't think they can win a fair fight. And they are taking advantage of lifelong Republican voters who are well-intended but have been deceived. I think that's a perfectly reasonable take to have, and that's the take I was trying to communicate.
Sure. And again, well, that's why I brought you on to get some clarity here and to have a back and forth about it because from my perspective as an audience member, it did not come off that way. And which is fine, right? Because again, I had not seen you. I didn't know you from Adam. I had not I had not the ability to actively communicate and get clarification of some of the more out there statements that we made and things like that that I feel were made. So it's all in the medium in which you're engaging with information. It's all about your ability to actually have a back and forth, and yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today because I hear you, I do, and I don't disagree that the erosion of institution is absolutely the goal of some of these actors that you mentioned, right? I would say McConnell not so much, right? McConnell's very big into institutional power and shoring up his own institutional power at the expense of others. But when it comes to Cruz, when it comes to DeSantis, Trump, the list goes on. Like, yeah, I couldn't, I couldn't gainsay you on that, right? I think that Trump, especially, is a symptom rather than the cause, mind you. We look at America's trust in institutions, and we look at the polling data, and it all shows for the last 10 years, right? So before Trump came on board, right? There has been a severe erosion and people's trust of the institutions of both government and science in America. And media as well, and for a wide variety of reasons, this has come to pass. We can get into it if you like. Um, and so I see while these are threats, like these individual actors in the Republican Party as a whole might be threats to this. I don't think they are the true threat. I think they're a symptom rather than the actual disease. I think if we were to defeat the Republicans today across the board, have a blue wave that we have never seen before, the problems will still exist. They'll just change form, right? They'll just change the method of erosion that happens. Because I would argue, and I did argue on Twitter, and we can have that again now, that the Democrats are all in on the erosion of certain institutions as well. It's just different ones, right? It's just different forms of attack that they've made. And while yes, I would agree with you that it's not near to the same extent, right? I do think it would be remiss not to at least explore and mention the problems that we have internally. Kind of like fix the beam in our own eye before looking at the enormous moat in the Republicans, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, but just a couple of things there. So I know you said in our Twitter exchange that you vote Democrat, and I take that at face value. I get the impression that you would consider yourself a centrist or moderate. Is that fair or is that wrong?
I am center left.
Okay.
I am more moderate than most people on Twitch, right?
Sure.
I think that again, from the backgrounds I've come from, where raised in a religious household, I was in the military, right, and that's a traditionally right-leaning space.
Sure.
I have almost always been the most left-leaning person in the room. That was a wake-up call. It was a big dissonance when I arrived in this space last year, right? I came in, and I had pushed back with my family who says all these crazy takes are being. I say no, that can't possibly be true. It's just made up. It's just propaganda by the Republicans that this is what they're just blowing it out of proportion. It's one or two crazies. And then I come into this space and people are unironically making those arguments that I said no one could possibly be making those arguments. And it's harder now for me to push back when my parents, my sisters, my other family will say things like, well, I think that science, for example, has been wokeified, to use their terminology, right? And so you really can't trust what science is saying anymore. It's become too politicized. And then we have a recent article, an editorial, to be clear, in Nature, right, which is a major science publication, talking about all these woke talking points that they had, or the conspiracy theory the Republicans were espousing, and says, you know what, we're unironically going to advocate for that now. We're unironically going to advocate for not withholding publishing data if it doesn't fit the. And they didn't phrase this way, but this is how a right winger would read it. If it doesn't fit the scientific narrative, and so it's like we are in an arms race, in my opinion, at least. It's we are in this arm race of reciprocal radicalization, is the term I use, right? Where we're pushing each other's to more and more extreme actions, and we are one-upping each other to say, well, if we don't do it, the other side will, so we have to do it before they do. And it's creating this untenable situation where it's going to lead to very, very bad outcomes. And I'm just very concerned about the future of politics in America. That's my thought.
Sure. So again, I mean, you said quite many interesting things there, and I'm gonna struggle to remember them all because there are many things I want to address. But
I apologize. If you need to cut me off,
no.
ranting, please do so.
Fair enough. And I'm just trying to process here. So as far as the initial impression I gave you, like I said, I fully cop to the it's subjective, right? So it's entirely possible that I came off a certain way, and certainly a lot of people did disagree with what I said, but of course it was a more right-leaning and more centrist audience than certainly I am. And that's the reason I asked where your persuasion was, because
I never answered your question, right?
You implied that you said you were center left, more
closer
moderate.
Progressive than you'd think. Like when it comes to universal health care, I'm all for it. When
Fair
it comes to codifying Roe v. Wade and things like that, all for it. When it comes to immigration, open those borders up. Not all the way, right? I don't want no borders, right? But far and away what it is now. When it comes to police reform, I'm not on board with ACAB, but I am on board with we need something needs to be done.
I'm not on board with ACAB either. I've got two of my closest friends who are still in Kentucky are police officers, and I have no reason to believe that they're bad actors. So the ACAB.
But yeah, when it comes down to like progressive, what progressives say they want, like almost line for line, right? I'm like, yeah, cool. It's just the methodology of how they are espousing wanting to get there gives me pause.
So then let me ask you then, because this is what I go back to. You mentioned an anecdote about, having conversations with family members and friends who you felt were repeating Republican talking points, and you stood up for the Democrats or the left or progressives, and you're like, no, that can't be true. And then you got into the space and found out it was true. I have no doubt, and will openly concede, that especially online, and especially on Twitter, when there's a degree of anonymity, and people are keyboard warriors, you will see and hear Twitter randos, and even sometimes with fairly impressive followers or followings, say crazy things. But to me, the crucial difference is, for the most part, those are just Twitter randos. Like the people that I mentioned who were radicalizing the Republican Party are the leaders of the Republican Party. So, for example, today, I enjoy the back and forth. Like I've had a couple of conversations with Destiny, and I've enjoyed it. I thought we got along pretty well, and there were some nice back and forths. And I've told him, and we've had DMs and whatnot. It's because I respect him and his talents that I told him. I said, I'm going to constantly be needling you to reprioritize, because I think he spends entirely too much time focusing on Twitter randos and not the actual powers that be in national and state politics who are making decisions. So, for example, today he shared a timely example. He shared a tweet about this person said something to the effect of, it was ableist to say that you couldn't hate kids. It was ableist to say that you couldn't hate kids. on the
I saw this tweet. Okay, yeah, go
yeah.
on.
And so my tweet to him was, as cringe as this Twitter rando with fewer than 1.5 thousand followers is, what about stuff like this? And I posted a couple of screenshots or a link to a tweet from Jesse Kelly, who's a conservative commentator, political commentator, with 560,000 followers, who is saying shit like the right to vote should be restricted to 35-year-old white landowning men. To me, there are orders of magnitude between which of these is more dangerous and which of these is more aberrant. And it frustrates me when I see moderates or centrists feel the instinct to suggest that these things are comparable in the threat they pose and who's saying them. It was the same thing, and some of this I went through, I can say from experience, I went through about a 2-year right-wing contrarian phase shortly after President Trump was elected. Now, I didn't vote for President Trump. I voted for Hillary. Easy vote. Absolutely no doubt in my mind that she was the better candidate. I still stand by it. And then I got into this. You talked about algorithms earlier and how they feed these echo chambers. Well, I've always been a debate guy. I've always been opinionated and on message boards. And so I was introduced to Ben Shapiro and then Jordan Peterson and then Steven Crowder. And so my YouTube algorithm was flooded with these people. And I remember thinking, damn, I wish the left had these guys, or somebody like this. And what I didn't know was that Destiny and Vosh and David Pakman and Brian Tyler Cohen were right around the corner, but I wasn't fed them. And of course, everything they did was complain about people like AOC. And I started complaining about AOC a lot. Like, damn, I never talked about Trump. Never. Because in my mind, I didn't vote for Trump. There's no way I was going to vote for him in 2020. I needed to be focused more on AOC. And then a friend of mine pointed out, Donald Trump is the president of the United States, or was, the most powerful man in the world. AOC was one of 435 members of the House of Representatives, one chamber of one branch. The power asymmetry, orders of magnitude apart. So as my friend pointed out, are you really spending your time wisely by fixating on her and ignoring what the most powerful man in the world is doing? And he was right. I was stepping over $1 for the sake of a penny. And that changed my view. I was like, what am I doing? I can criticize AOC when I disagree with her while making it abundantly clear that whatever problems she exudes, she is nothing compared to the excesses and the danger and the threat and the stupidity embodied in Donald Trump. And so that, from then on out, that's been my ethic. I don't have a problem with the left criticizing the left. When I criticize Destiny, I am a leftist criticizing Destiny who is on the left, whether some people want to accept it or not. Yeah. But I would never pretend, I would never make Destiny my primary target, and I would be very careful about when, where, and how I criticize him. So I don't call him stupid, I don't rant at him, I don't try to take his knees out from under him. I just try to engage in a way that pushes him in a way that I think is more productive to the cause of the left. And that's what I want moderates to do.
I get you.
So I'd like you to tell me what you think about that.
So I don't disagree on principle. I don't disagree on principle that again these bad actors in the Republican Party are far and above the bad for most of the bad actors in the Democrats. There are some on the very extreme fringes that I could say, yo, we may need to take a look at this person, right? They don't have power now, but if they ever got power, they represent a threat, right? Especially when it comes to censorship, when it especially comes to tackling like free speech and things like that, there is a very real threat on the left too. And free speech is one of my most important issues. I rant on that a lot, right? And this turn we've taken recently, right? Because then when I grew up in the 90s, it was the leftists that were supporting free speech absolutism in a lot of ways. The right was trying to censor video games. The right was trying to censor things like Harry Potter. The right was engaged in their crusade to cancel, 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 cancel. Once we had gained more institutional societal power, right, and academic power especially, the left has shown no hesitancy to use a lot of those same tools, right? But to address your point, to address your issue and why I pick at the left, or it may seem like I pick at the left more than I do the right, is simply because the audience I have. The audience I have isn't going to vote for Trump. There is nothing I could say or do that will get them to vote for Trump for the most part. I have a few conservative people in my chat, right? And the reason I do have the conservative audience I do is because I'm willing to be honest uh, and full throated in my opposition to certain tendencies on the left that I very much oppose. And I think that being that way, right, being willing to be full throated against when I have a criticism of someone like Destiny or someone like Vosh or someone like AOC or Biden, even, um, shows an honesty that they'll be willing to trust me. So when I also say, yo, gang, as bad as these are, Trump is doing the same things, but to the 10th, like to the 10th degree. I am more likely to be listened to and trusted, and I am more likely to be persuasive. And again, I think it is important that our parties, like I wish to God the Republicans had policed their own more. I wish to God the Republicans had did this, right? That they had isolated their fringe and pushed out their fringe instead of embracing their fringe, which they have for political expediency. Because the Democrats were always, in their minds, the worst threat, right? Like look at, and I said this earlier with Tiberius, and I'll say it again today. Like if you had asked me in 2012 if I had ever would think of Mitt Romney as an acceptable Republican, a reasonable Republican, I would have said no way, no way. This guy's crazy, right? This guy's on the fringe. But looking back on that in 2022, and seeing Romney being the reasonable one in the room in that party is wild to me. It's wild. The dissonance is there. So when we talk about like the differences in power, you're absolutely right. But I would say that the differences in audience and who you're communicating is equally, if not more important. Because if you are sitting there criticizing the right in a room full of leftists, you're preaching to the choir, you're doing nothing. Like there's no advocacy, there is no the needle's not moving at all. But if we can purge the bad actors on our own side, right? Purge is a loaded term, I understand. But if we could get rid of the bad actors on the left side, we are more likely to win elections, right? We are more likely to get those people who we think are the worst actors out of power, because every time we don't push back or we ignore when our side does something bad or we justify it because the other side is worse, that is hurting us electorally, right? That's my argument there.
So again, a couple of things. I just want to reiterate. I have no problem and think that there is absolutely a necessary place for accountability.
Shut up with that comrade shit on his side. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Holding ourselves and one another accountable. Again, I do it quite a bit, and Destiny's usually my prime target just because I think that he's not only the biggest person in the space, but I think that he has such a talent for what he does and for advocacy and for making his views palatable to more centrist and right-leaning audiences. That, but I've told him this, that I've also felt that because of personal, understandably personal, backlashes with Vosh and Hassan and others as well, and then the kind of shit he's under 24/7 as far as people calling him a Nazi and all these things, that I would understand how it could make a person jaded, right, and push them away. I mean, he himself has made that argument before, even though he denies that it's been done to him. So again, criticizing the left from the left, I'm all for it. It has to be done. It's one of the things that makes the left relatively unique compared to the right, and I don't want us to lose that. What I absolutely don't want, and I'm not saying that you do this, but if we're talking about getting feelings and whatnot, this is the feeling I get from a lot of centrists, and this is what that one particular comment that I responded to on Twitter.
Go on, please.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Not a centrist, but go on.
No, I understand, but that's what I mean. That's how it came off, right? So I accept you at face value there, but that's now, right? You and I didn't know each other as well. So anyway, is this idea that because we hold the left accountable for the left, the sins of the left deserve as much pushback, as much scrutiny, and the same severity of backlash as the left gives to the right. And I don't think that's right. Not only do I not think that's politically expedient, I actually don't think on the merits that it's earned in 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100. So you compare, for example, like people create these false equivalences all the time on the right, and I would argue on the left or in the center between, they'll say, Democrats and Democrats and Republicans, they're both corrupt. Like, yeah, you talk about Trump, but what about Hunter Biden? Like, anything beyond a surface level analysis will tell you that these things are not comparable. So Hunter Biden, unlike President Trump's kids, he doesn't have a position in the White House. That's one major difference. He's not in a position of power. It's a huge, huge difference. If you're in power, you deserve more scrutiny than someone who's not. So right off the bat, Trump's kids, like Ivanka and Jared, they did deserve more scrutiny for their actions by far than Hunter Biden. Number one. But number two, Hunter Biden has been investigated. Not only has he been investigated, but that investigation has been allowed to proceed under President Biden. Biden has allowed the Trump-appointed U.S. attorney to continue investigating his son. That's a second major difference. We could do the same thing with Hillary's emails. Oh my God, okay, Trump, but I mean, what about her emails? She was investigated from 2015, 2016. And then under President Trump, a Department of Justice Inspector General reviewed the FBI's investigation. The FBI, which was led by a Republican, James Comey.
So not to cut you off on these things, but yeah, there's a reason I vote Democrat. No, dude, like you're preaching to the choir again. Like, I get you. No, you're right.
But the thing is, though, I have no doubt that you vote Democrat. But what I think you should do, in my opinion, is that you should always keep in mind whenever you criticize the left from the left, I do think you need to keep the discrepancies in mind. So it's not that I don't think you vote Democrat. I think that you should be using your platform, be it to leftists or to rightists, or right-wingers, even if you do it in a way that is more palatable to right-wingers. At no point, basically, in my opinion, you should walk away from every interaction going, did I give the impression that the right and left are equally bad or comparably bad? And if you can say, honestly, no, I think I've made it very clear, even when I'm criticizing the left, very clear, that the right and left are not equally bad. And anyone who's like, well, both sides, that they're wrong, then fair enough. I just didn't get that impression.
I get you. And like I said, I don't know how much of my content you've seen.
The Prime Kai thing, which, by the way, excellent stuff.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I go on.
And the Cherry, and the conversation with we talked about
Cherry versus Ellen DeGenerate.
Yeah, I had no idea who that guy was. That was not a good look for that person. Yeah.
It is what it is. Like, so I tend to okay. So maybe it'll help if I just kind of explain what I want to do with my platform, right? Because I'm not so much. It's called the Death of Certainty for a reason. I don't care what conclusion you come to after you watch my show, right? That's not my point here, because I believe if we teach people correct ways of thinking, they will eventually come to correct conclusions. I think that too often we try to shortcut this process to our detriment. We try to just give them the conclusion that we've arrived at and not lead them why we've gotten there or the thought process we've gone through. We've not taught them how to reason it out for themselves. And sure, if they trust you, it'll work, right? But only as long as they trust you and as long as you're able to reach them, right? As soon as they go off and get into other echo chambers and get to trusting other people, they might fall down into perilous paths, as they say. I think that what I want people to come away thinking from my show, I don't ask my questions. The question I ask myself isn't whether or not I think I presented both sides as equally bad or not. I ask my question, like, is my audience going to come away exposed to ideas they haven't before? Are they going to come away exposed to ways of thinking that they had yet to consider? And if my answer to that is yes, then I think I've had a successful stream, because I want people to hear the bad ideas in a controlled environment that I can helpfully provide, right? It doesn't always work that way. There's been a couple panels, right? But I generally try to moderate as such that everyone who comes on my show, regardless of their opinion, has a chance to be heard by my audience, and that instead of introducing caricatures of what I'm saying the Republicans are saying and doing, I let them hear from the people who are voting Republican themselves what they think they're saying and doing, and the reasons why they think they're in the right. Because we can talk about these whataboutisms, and certainly a lot of Republicans will retreat to that, right? Certainly. I won't, like, look, this is in my household, this is what happens all day. What about, like, Hillary Clinton, still the most hated person ever in my household, right?
Sure.
But there are many people, like Tiberius D. He voted for Clinton in 2016. He's died in the will Republican. He didn't vote for Biden in 2020, unfortunately, and we have to have a conversation later about why he changed that. But it is important for both me and my audience to understand. Well, let's take Tiberius D as an example. Why did he change from pro-Clinton in 2016 to pro-Trump in 2020? What happened, and what is his thought process? Because he is not a dumb man. He's a very smart man, to make him think that Trump was a better pick than Biden. And we cannot do that if we are concerned about simply being a propaganda mouthpiece for the left. That's what I'm trying to do with my platform. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think that's where, not that we won't get along. We have been, and you've been handling my DM puns very well. By the way, that you need to get used to that. That's like
Look,
I was called a
and
pun goblin.
not to cut you off real
Yeah.
quick, but I'll just straight up with you. I like you as a person, and I think we could be great friends. I
Oh
don't know
yeah.
if we'll agree, right? But I don't predicate my friendship with someone on whether or not they believe in the same thing I do. So go ahead.
Well, to I mean, like I said, most of my friends are conservative, but I can't pretend. Like, it's funny. I remember thinking, there's no way political beliefs could ever inform relationships. I do think personally that that's a privileged view, a naive view. Like, I couldn't be friends with a dyed-in-the-wool Nazi, or something like that. I think everybody has their limits. Now, I agree too often Twitter randos and certain people on the left take that line, like they're way too restrictive with that line. Oh, you didn't flip off your Republican uncle when you saw him? I can't be friends with you. You're a Republican enabler. Like, yeah, there are some people out there like that, and that's ridiculous. But no, as to an extent, some political opinions would be a deal breaker. But that's not that. I don't think that would ever exist between us. But what I was getting at was, you and I will probably have, assuming we stay in touch, which I hope that we do, we will probably have like a long-term political tension. And the reason is because your purpose and mine are different. And not that they're mutually exclusive, but they will occasionally collide. Occasionally.
Clash a little bit.
Because...
I think you're wrong, but I want to hear you say it before I assume. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, because I certainly want to have difficult conversations. That's why most of my conversations have been with more right-leaning or more centrist people than myself. And they have always been, for the most part, I don't want to say adversarial, but we have had a clear difference of opinion. But at the same time, I do think that the current political landscape, as well as how the Republican Party at its leadership is operating, that I wouldn't want to be that guy just asking questions. Like so like when you say, I want in a controlled environment to expose my audience to other ideas. I think that that's fine in theory, but obviously we could walk away with 10,000 examples where that could be dangerous, right? So you're running a risk, right? Every time you have certain conversations, you are running the risk of actually leading a person down the wrong path. And maybe that's a risk worth having to you. Fair enough.
Well, my argument against that, right, would be that you're right, there is a risk, but the greater risk is not having those conversations, because those conversations are going to be had whether you have them or not. They are going to be heard. These ideas are going to be spread. These ideas are going to be propagated. And better, right, to provide an inoculation, a mental inoculation is what I call it, right? So it's very important when someone says, you know what, racism isn't that bad, actually, that you know how to combat against that line of thinking. It's very important that you have heard the arguments, that you understand how to push back, and that you understand why they are saying that, so that you can properly address it. Because if you can't, and this is what happened in 2014, kind of 15 era, we didn't have answers to these fundamental questions, which we needed to. And so in a very, like the anti-SJW arc was devastating in a way to our youth, right? Because it just ran through them because they had never been challenged before. And I think we could see this when people like the Serfs debate Lauren Southern and get absolutely manhandled,
Sure.
right? Just absolutely crushed. It's because they have not sharpened their knives. They've, as Cherry put it, put themselves in safe rooms, right? And not expose themselves to what's actually going on. And they get empty calories, right? This React content they do is empty calories. They think it's helping, but it's not. And that dissonance, that difference there is where I would push back against you hard and say that I think, one, we do want the same thing. I want the bad actors and the Republicans to be gone. I want people to vote Democrat. I want to get them to the truth. I just think our differences here is we have very different ways of going, different ideas of how to do that. And I think it's not our goal that is different. It is our method.
So again, just want to reiterate, either I miscommunicated or you misunderstood, but I support having these conversations. Again, I've said that's why I'm having conversations with pretty much everybody who is rightward of me. If I didn't want to have these conversations, I wouldn't engage with them. I do want to have these conversations. That's why I still am a fan of Destiny's, even though he's getting pushback from a lot of leftists for his conversations with Lauren Southern and others. I think that that's good that he does that. I think there's utility there. And as I said, part of the reason why I was briefly radicalized into this contrarian, playing the devil's advocate for right-wingers. I mean, that's what I did on message boards, in personal conversations, on Facebook, I mean, just all sorts of places where there was no doubt in my mind who I was going to vote for come November. It was going to be a Democrat. But I stepped over $1 for the sake of a penny. I would always go to bat for the right-wingers. I gave the Republican Party a line of credit that it didn't deserve. And when I say the Republican Party, I do mean the leaders
I get you.
of the Republican Party. So I get it. I still stand by having those tough conversations. But where we may be missing each other, and maybe we're not, we're having a hard time articulating it. That to me is not walking away, giving people something else to think about. To me, that's exposing your audience to bad ideas while deliberately seeking to refute them. Now, if that's what you do, if that's what you want to do, we are on the same page. If, on the other hand, because what I heard was you say, I don't think about whether or not I after a conversation, if I advocated for a certain position or whatnot. You made it seem, I heard, we're just having a free-for-all conversation and let the chips fall where they may. But that to me is not what you're advocating for. If what you're saying is, hey, is racism good? And you bring a racist on to talk with you. If you hear him out, but then push back against him consistently, you are exposing your audience to a bad idea. But it's not a chips may fall where they may. You have a position. You take a position, a firm position. and you are arguing it in the most effective way possible. You're not
So
agnostic.
here's my content, and again, I think I miscommunicated, and this is my fault, right? Um, I moderate the discussion. I usually don't
Oh,
participate in the discussion for the
oh,
most part. Like, I'm trying to branch out into having more of these discussions where I'm the one, because normally I'd go on other people's panels to express my view. Like, I'll go on Prime Kai, I'll go on NotSoErudite show, I'll go on Stardust panels, Cherry's panel. Not she doesn't do panels, but you know what I mean.
I
I go on
tried to
other.
name. By the way, you should tell her, because I recommended this and she said she liked it, but she will not go with it. Her new panel show or should be called the Cherry Pit.
That was her old Discord name.
Are you
Before we were
serious? No, it
I
was
believe so.
not.
I
Okay,
believe so.
damn it. All right,
If
fine.
I might be misremembering.
I was like giving myself 100 points for the cleverness on that one, but
It was a
apparently
clever one. It's
no,
just
apparently
not
not. It's
original,
just
which
her
is
oldest
fine.
one. Okay,
You
sorry.
can
Go
still
ahead.
be clever without being novel. I mean, this idea. Sorry, you're triggering me in another direction, but
Triggered me. You took away my claim to fame. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
this uh so yeah, I will bring on, like, for example, Wednesday, right? And I'll use this as a shill for what I have coming up. Wednesday, I don't know if you've seen this on Twitter, but there's been a discourse around racial purity from the left, right? Where there are certain actors in the left community who are minorities who are saying, you know what, we want to keep the melanin in our children strong, right? And this is being defended by actors within the leftist community, right? That I interact with on a regular basis and say, you know what, that take isn't racist at all. It's because they're undergoing systemic oppression and they have every right to fight back, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas other people are saying, no, that's David Duke shit, right? And so we are having a panel on that where I will be moderating between representatives of these two groups. And while I'm a moderator, it's very important, especially if I want people to trust me to moderate fairly, that I don't give my opinion during the debate itself. I have an opinion, obviously. I've expressed that opinion, obviously, but I would lose the trust of the panelists that I bring on if I stepped in. Does that make sense?
It does. I don't know what I would do in your position there, because I think that is certainly a line to walk carefully, right? So let me give you one that they say that people refer to quite a bit: climate change, anthropogenic climate change. If you were a journalist, if you were a reporter, an interviewer, or a moderator, do you consider these roles comparable, by the way, in terms of like what you expect from a
Journalist and a
yeah?
moderator? No, I do
Okay.
not,
So
honestly.
some
And
people,
real quick, thank you for the bits, Fred Methodist. If you guys enjoyed the show, give me money. Give me money. Okay, that's my capitalism. Go ahead.
so some people do consider these roles comparable in the sense that a journalist is supposed to be, the we report, you decide, the cold, objective arbiter. You're not supposed to take a biased question or whatnot. And so, for example, I'm sure we've all seen clips of journalists over the years, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and everybody in between, having two people on, either in studio or on the screens, talking about climate change. Okay. Now you think these roles are different. Fair enough. I do think that they're distinct. If you were moderate, like, how do I want to say this? To me, the objective view is not to say there are two sides to the climate change discussion. One side is supported by 99% of peer-reviewed climatological study, and it's a consensus that's been around for decades. The other side has wishful thinking. These are not two equal sides, and to me it would be dishonest to suggest that there are two equally matched sides. Now, if a person wanted to ask a tough question, why isn't it 100%? Are there no good faith objections to, the peer-reviewed climatological studies? How accurate are your models really? Like, there are tough questions to ask, but any scenario that says or even suggests that these are two equal sides, that's bad in my view, and dishonest. What do you think?
I think that we might have, and again, I'm assuming here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but we might have a difference here when it comes to, I don't think it's my job is to make sure that the people I have on, right, are presenting their side in the most honest and genuine way that they can, right?
Sure.
Obviously, I think that one side is right and one side is wrong. Not always, right? There are some topics I've had when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to just foreign policy in general, where I don't know, right? Like I
Sure.
don't know what the correct answer is, and I'm not sure. And that's one of the reasons I host a panel is I want different opinions, and I want to try to convince me. But like I don't know, man. It's like my audience is mad at you. By the way, they're like you managed to divert race mixing into climate change, and how dare you? They wanted to have that discussion, but I
Oh,
don't care
I'm
about
used
that,
to
right?
audiences being mad at
Yeah,
me. That'll be
I
okay.
don't care about that, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think that when it comes to my job as a moderator, is if if I am seen as being favorable to one side, because what I want to do is I want to get the side that doesn't agree with me to tune in.
Sure.
I want to get them to tune in, to give it a watch, to give an honest listen.
You know
Right?
what? Let me just say this. Fair enough. Fair enough. Because again, we're talking. We're talking right now from the vantage point of you as a debate moderator.
Yes.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
When you and I engaged, you weren't in the capacity of a moderator. You were a commentator on Twitter, and you were an audience member at Erudite's panel.
Yes.
So then let me ask you on that. Take the moderator hat off, assuming that you did,
Sure.
you did at the time you and I were engaging. If I concede, and I will concede, that as a moderator, even if one side is clearly correct, it may be in the best interests of a good faith conversation to just like police certain rules and let the other two slug it out. But when you're not acting as moderator, using the example of climate change. And the reason I changed it to climate change is because to me, I wanted to test the extremes of where you fall in it. Because that to me is a topical issue. It's a relevant issue, but it is, as far as issues go, it is pretty clearly one-sided. Because I agree with you. There's a lot of ambiguity and nuance to political positions. And there is even to an extent with climate change in terms of what steps to take to resolve it. But its existence and the role that humans play in it is unambiguously clear.
No, I look. I'll cut you off here. I agree with you. Like I think most Republicans at this point acknowledge it's a problem, right? Like I've seen most Republicans in my day-to-day life that I have talked to, not the Twitterati, right? But are saying, yeah, climate change is real. We just think that we should do something different about it, right? And that's where the conversation is had, I think, when it comes to honesty. Now, when it comes to what I was pushing back against you, like our initial disagreement, I was being very honest with you. I think that when it comes to the filibuster, I think that both sides, and I know you're going to hate this word, both sides have issues with the filibuster. I think that when it comes to how we have gotten to the point where Roe v. Wade is no longer a thing, Democrats hold some blame in that. Absolutely, both of the side of not codifying it when they should have, right? Even though there is questions on whether they had the political ability to do so, like the actual votes in order to do so, but that's another conversation. But when it comes to the filibuster, the nuclear option, while again, I think that you argued clearly that the Republicans were norm breaking, so to speak, like that did not mean we had to escalate. We chose to escalate. And the fact that we were pushed to escalate, fair enough, right? But just as when someone makes you angry, right? Even though they instigate it, it's not okay to escalate through physical violence, right? That's not okay. That's the same thing here. Well, yeah, they were egging us on and they were daring us to do it, but we still chose to jump, gang. We still chose to throw that punch, and that opened up a door that allowed them politically to be able to drop the bomb on us. They rope-a-doped us, gang. They rope-a-doped us. And when we talk about in the context, right? I had argued this strenuously back and forth with leftists, right? Primarily that wanted to get rid of the filibuster, right? That we're looking and say, hey, we just need to get rid of the filibuster. This is anti-democratic. We don't need it anymore. We have both sides of Congress, both houses of the House and the Senate. We are in a position where we can pass our stuff, but they're not letting us. We need to just get rid of it so we can force this stuff through. I think that was astronomically short-sighted. I think that it was dangerous to do, especially even though now the metrics are looking a little bit better when it comes to the midterms. I think we'll actually hold the Senate. Clip that. That is a prediction I'm making today. We'll still lose the House, but I think we hold the Senate. Yeah, at the time, we were estimated to just get blown out in the Senate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that not having this tool, right, not having this weapon, this arrow in our quiver, would have been just the stupidest move ever. Anyway, that's my thought.
So, first things first, I have no problem conceding that the filibuster should not be abolished because the filibuster is a tool. It's a hammer, and hammers can be used for good things, and they can be used for bad things. They can be used to hit a nail, and they can be used to crack a baby in the skull, right? So I agree with you and have long agreed from the beginning that it would be a mistake to kill the filibuster unless you could guarantee that Democrats would hold majorities in both chambers of Congress in perpetuity, which of course you can't. So now I do support filibuster carve-outs when bipartisanship fails, which it regularly does. But
so this carve-out thing, right? Like, how is that, if we normalize this, right? If we decide we're going to make carve-outs to this, again, we saw how that worked when it came to the carve-out we made for political appointees under Obama, right? We made that carve-out and said, this is as far as we're going to go. And the Republicans were like, no, we're going to push it a little farther.
Well, and so let me get to that. So let me get to that. So part of my issue is, there again, you said a bunch of really interesting things, and so it may be a bit out of order, but I'm going from memory here. So you were talking about how escalation. That's the first thing I want to address. Punching back. I would argue that that's self-defense, not escalation. Escalation is when they hit you in the face and you pull out a weapon and shank them or something. I don't want to violate terms of service here, but like
option, right?
A clear say what?
Maybe something like that. Maybe use a nuclear option on them, right? When they're pressuring you.
That's a good pun. That is a good pun. But to me, that really isn't an escalation because it was very specifically tailored. So I hear you. Don't escalate. But do you mean to imply that we shouldn't engage in self-defense? Is the option?
Of course
then
not.
What would self-defense look like in a way that Republicans wouldn't go, you escalated?
I understand. So we've done this before, right? Like we did this. We've done this recently with Biden's and his passing of the recent legislation victories he's had. Right, the filibuster is still in place. There's no carve-outs to the filibuster that we made legislatively, and yet we were still able to pass a lot of the legislation, right, recently by doing, changing up how we engaged with how to pass this by giving Republicans some measure of, like, Biden allowed the appointee of a federal judge that was actually anti-abortion in a state, right? He
didn't. That was reported.
Maybe I got that wrong. Was that
no? It was reported that he was going. If it's the one I'm thinking of from Kentucky, I think it was. He was going to allow it as a favor to McConnell, but he did not proceed with the nomination. I could be wrong on that.
Fair enough.
Chat should fact check.
Yeah, look that up. I thought it went through. I could be wrong.
But anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, but yeah, and that brings in a point, gang. If I ever say something that sounds weird, check me on it. Right? Look it up for yourself.
Same here.
Don't just believe us. Okay, so but yeah, when it looks, going back to 2013, right? Yes, we were having major problems getting some of our appointees passed, some of President Obama's appointees passed. It was frustrating, and it was something where we felt stymied in a way that we hadn't before, because we did have, well, no, I think at this point we didn't have a majority that we did have before.
There wasn't. Otherwise, they wouldn't have needed to use the nuclear option. There wasn't a filibuster-proof majority. It was in President Obama's second term.
So we had lost seats. Okay,
yeah.
We had lost seats.
Right.
And so we hadn't the same oomph that we did before. So it was frustrating, right? But part of this is we needed to give some concessions that we just were unwilling to do. And I think had we done that, we could have done it without making this carve out, right? And this would have, and again, obviously, I can't know the future, right? If we had done it differently, if things had been different, I don't know for sure that if it would have turned out differently. But I think that acting as if we had to do this, that we had no choice but to do this, is just erroneous, and I want to push back against that.
So, I mean, that's certainly an opinion that a lot of people had. Let me just backtrack a bit. The go to the Biden thing. I just checked. Biden did abandon his plan to nominate the anti-abortion judge. Now, if you're referring to the recent legislation passed, the one I remember is this. Republicans and Democrats were in the process of negotiating the bipartisan CHIPS bill, okay, which would bring semiconductor manufacture back to the U.S. That would help reduce inflation, because that's part of the reason why inflation was so high these past few years, because we need semiconductors for everything. Automobiles, military equipment, healthcare, blah, blah, blah. And we get it mostly from Taiwan. And another big one is China, who has its sights on Taiwan, so it's a national security issue as well. But it was a bipartisan bill that had been worked on for, I think, right at the beginning of Biden's term, and they were going back and forth, back and forth. Senator McConnell voted for it. But at the same time, Majority Leader Schumer and Senator Manchin were working on a separate reconciliation bill that would then eventually become the Inflation Reduction Act. Two parallel bills that had absolutely nothing to do with each other. McConnell hears that Manchin's working with the rest of the Democrats on this, and it will give Biden another victory. Because if CHIPS passes, that's one victory Biden's going to get credit for. And then if they successfully pass a reconciliation bill to address climate change, close tax loopholes, that's a second win, and we're going into a midterm season. So McConnell issued a public threat. If the Democrats work on a reconciliation bill, I will pull my votes from the CHIPS bill. A bipartisan bill that he worked on.
Lied. Yeah, I remember.
So that's brinksmanship, right? That's bad faith brinksmanship. It wasn't a bill that he took issue with. It was a bill he supported, but he was willing to tank it to stop Biden from getting a separate political win. That used a perfectly valid tool, reconciliation. So, Schumer and Manchin publicly dropped it. And all of us on the left were pissed. McConnell wins again. So they passed the CHIPS bill. And then Schumer and Manchin had been in secret negotiations the entire time. And then they passed the Inflation Reduction Act.
Good politics, to be honest.
Great politics. But Republicans were upset, Whick. Like, they saw it as bad faith norm breaking. So my point is this. Short of just letting Republicans do whatever they want, they're going to see any response by Democrats, even especially effective responses by Democrats, as escalation. You know, you had John Cornyn and others publicly stating that Manchin lied to them, Manchin betrayed them, that Manchin violated the norms, the gentleman's agreement. So where I get frustrated with your optimism is, respectfully, you really can't conceive of a scenario in contemporary politics where Republicans will cede defeat in grace and not cry foul. They will, and that's a good example. You just said it was good politics, indicating, and that was an example you cited of that's the way Democrats should do it. But Republicans were still upset by it.
They were upset. Look, if you're, and maybe this is if you were think that I am just worried about whether they're upset or not, or whether their fifis are hurt, I don't give a shit, to be honest. Like, that's not what matters here. And that's not why the 2013 thing was different, right? It wasn't just because we upset them. It's because while rhetorically they may cry that they violated gentleman's agreement, there's no teeth to that. There's no teeth to that in the same way that when we use the nuclear option, and it was caused, like, again, they had talked about this back in 2004, I believe,
2005.
Right? 2005, sorry. They had looked into doing this before and decided, it's just too much, it's too risky. This is the thing we're going to solidify here. And again, right? Even after the carve-outs that McConnell extended in 2017 when Trump asked for more carve-outs, right? And I know we addressed this in Twitter feed, but I want to talk about it in front of my audience as well. McConnell was like, you know what? No, we're not going to do that. And while he may have been able to get some legislation passed, we used the filibuster to block so much legislation even after that. Like huge amounts of bills, huge amounts of Republican legislation was just stymied because the Democrats use this weapon, this tool, over and over and over again to good effect, right? It caused McConnell to have to compromise on the COVID bill, the COVID relief bill, right? They had a version in place, but we said if you try to pass this version, we are not going to let you unless you concede to us, right? Certain things. And McConnell was forced because of the filibuster threat to concede to certain things and to pass this bill anyway in a much more palatable form. This is an example of it working in our favor, right? So I do not consider it equivocable. This what we did in 2022 with Manchin and Schumer and their kind of backroom deals, because that has happened before. It will happen again. It's something Republicans have done. It's something Democrats have done. This is just the most recent example of this kind of politics, right?
Well, in both scenarios, in both scenarios, Republicans cried foul and saw it as an escalation of adversarial politics. So I understand that you don't agree, right? But they do. So what's to stop that?
Do they though? Do they, like, I want to push back against, do they though, or is it something they're just saying, right? Because I think that sometimes politicians say shit, right? They don't believe it.
Well,
they say it for their base. They say it to get elected.
Sure, but not being a mind reader, we probably have to.
No, I understand, but based on the actions, right, of what we saw McConnell do, he actively believed that no, this was materially different. Now, maybe you're right. Maybe
no, we don't. Again,
just real quick. Okay. Let me finish. Maybe in 2 years we'll see that they use that as an excuse to escalate things further in a way that we haven't seen before. But I doubt it. I think that this is just something that they got hit with. They need to save face, so they're saying, blah, 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 they were meanies. The Democrats were meanies in a way that I, again, feel is substantively different than the rhetoric going on in 2013. I just don't think these are comparable.
So a couple of things, too. So when the Republicans considered invoking the nuclear option in 2005, it wasn't out of principle. It was because they won the next midterms and they expanded their majority. See, that's my frustration. Is I understand you talk about politicians' rhetoric. I struggle with this word sometimes. Rhetoric and their actions. We know that McConnell is willing to violate norms. Doesn't necessarily mean he'll violate every norm. Or maybe he will, but he parses it out on an as-needed basis. But you seem to think of McConnell as this, and you said at the beginning, this respecter of norms and institutions. But I would actually argue there's an argument to be made that he doesn't. He wants a carefully controlled demolition of institutions, as opposed to the recklessness of the Trump administration. He violated norms with what he did by withholding Merrick Garland's seat, or nomination hearing, rather, wasn't even guaranteed seat, because they could have voted against it. But the reporting was that he was so respected and so centrist that they would have voted for him, which would have given Obama another win. That was a norm violation. Then he violated the norm he violated, like that he replaced with the norm he violated in 2020. McConnell is a norm violator. So, in effect, we just have his word that he wouldn't break the filibuster. But maybe he would if he felt the situation merited it. Because, again, in 2005, it wasn't principle that stopped them. It was midterms allowing them to expand their majority so they didn't have to break it. That is fundamentally different. The circumstances changing so that they no longer needed to consider employing a norm breaking doesn't mean that if the circumstances were different, they wouldn't break that norm. So that's
sure. I get you that there are incentive structures that incentivize people to behave in different ways. But I still argue that, again, it was absolutely an escalation. And you could say it was a needed escalation for self-defense. I just disagree. I think that we could have gotten what we needed to do. And while, yes, maybe in the future, Mitch would have done what he did anyway when it came to Supreme Court nominees. I don't know. You don't know. No one knows. We can't say that with any degree of certainty here. But it would have been, at the very least, much harder politically for him to get away with it in a way that it wasn't hard at all for him to do.
What do you
in
mean
that time.
politically get away with it?
Right? Like, so he cares about his party, right? The Republican Party and having power. That's what he wants, right? And he plays the national political game, I would argue, better than the Democrats do, right? Like, locally, he's safe. We get that, right? But for him to be Speaker of the Senate or
Majority leader.
Yeah, Majority Leader. Sorry, mixed up
It's
the
okay.
House there. He needs to have a majority in the Senate. And absolutely, as we can see with the current 50-50 Senate, the country's pretty divided on the Senate level. And so it behooves him, right, not to rock the boat too hard. And I truly believe this, that had Harry Reid not done what he did in 2013, McConnell would not have felt empowered to do what he did in 2016 with the Supreme Court nominee.
But where I'm confused is you made it seem like he is incentivized to not break rules because it will cause negative political consequences. What's your basis for that? Because I would argue the Republicans have been largely rewarded for strategic breaking of norms. They got 3 Supreme Court justices appointed, and 2 of them came from norm breaking.
But
and
they
we saw
lost the 2020 presidential election. They lost the Senate and the 50-50 Senate, right? They weren't able
let's
to
think
gain
about
that.
but let's think about that. So do you think that they lost the 2020 presidential election because McConnell broke Senate norms?
No, I think they lost it because of Trump breaking.
Correct. So that's really
norms,
not an
right?
argument in favor of, see, they lost because McConnell broke
No, because
norms.
norms were broken. Not because of who broke them, but certain norms that the American public cared about. And let's be clear, the American public, as they understand it, cares about the filibuster. All the polls I've seen, right, at least recently, have shown that most Americans support the filibuster as it stands, right?
So
I think that, like, my argument here isn't that Mitch broke norms so they lost in 2020. It's that norms were broken that the American public cared about, right? And they blamed it on the Republicans, rightly so, and they paid a price at the poll.
What norms do you think that Trump broke or what cost him the election? I think he lost the election because of COVID and the economic fallout of COVID, to say nothing that he is personally disliked. I don't think that but that goes back to what I said earlier about the differences between Trump and McConnell, where one is a wrecking ball, just swinging out there, knocking everything over, and one is more strategic demolition charges. We're gonna detonate this one at this time. No, we don't need to detonate this one. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, we need to detonate that one, but we're gonna do it in a week. So I'm talking about McConnell. I agree with you that if you get a reckless dumbass leading the Republican Party, like Donald Trump, that there could be consequences to him deviating from what we expect of presidents. Though, again, I still say he lost due to COVID and the economic fallout. And he also gained more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016.
I agree with you on that, like that COVID was the primary cause. But that would, if it weren't for the other stuff, it would not have been enough. Because, again, even if he was a perfectly normal president, norm-keeping president, COVID still would have happened, right? COVID still would have occurred, and he still would have struggled, right? That would have been an issue no matter how he handled it.
And I think
no matter
that
how the federal government responded to that, it was going to be a problem.
And
right?
potentially any person in Trump's position would have also lost re-election. I don't think that Trump was uniquely threatened by COVID politically. I think he probably went further than somebody like Obama would. What?
But as you saw, right? Like, I don't think COVID alone would have been enough to break him.
I have no basis. I have no basis for believing that.
Yeah, no, I get you, but the reason I say that, right, is because I think that it traditionally presidents go for 2 terms, right? Like, at least in modern politics, you have an advantage when
yes,
you are
there's the incumbency advantage. Yes,
indeed. And so that combined with the fact that, you know, again, as you saw, he gained votes. He gained votes, even with the COVID issue, right? But there was enough people who turned away, right? And now we can look at the turnout and a high turnout and how they gained votes and we gained more. I point that to not so much as to a love for Trump or hate for Trump. I point that to the expansion of mail-in voting throughout
Sure,
the country.
sure.
Right? That was going to, like, no matter who was running or what the stake, like, that was just going to push up participation by leaps and bounds. I think that the primary driver of increased turnout in 2020 was not Trump. It was mail-in voting and the expansion of the access to vote. Because it turns out, gang, if you give people easier access to vote, they're more likely to vote. Crazy,
Sure,
huh?
and
Right?
Trump was also essentially suppressing his own turnout by questioning the validity of mail-in votes. So we know that Republicans didn't avail themselves of mail-in and absentee ballots to the extent that Democrats did. But again, respectfully, that doesn't refute the point because the incumbency advantage does apply. But Republicans in modern history are the exception. There's only been one Republican president in the past 33 years who has won re-election, and that was George W. Bush. George H.W. Bush lost because of a major economic catastrophe, and so did President Trump. So I don't think the incumbency advantage is enough for a president to overcome a global pandemic with a million person or at that time a 500,000 person body count plus the economic fallout that ensued.
Plus, and
Com-
again, you're just ignoring the norm breaking he did. You say that didn't have a factor. I say it absolutely was a factor. I
I
think to
didn't say
ignore
that
that
it
is a
wasn't a factor. I just said that it clearly wasn't the primary factor. I think that Trump,
sure.
because first we were talking about McConnell breaking norms, and McConnell breaks norms differently than Trump. So that's one difference. So I don't think that using Trump as an example, I don't think that that's valid in the first place because when McConnell breaks norms, he does it very differently, much more shrewdly than Trump does, who's a wrecking ball. But number two, based on the data I've seen, and I imagine
No, let's address that first point first. Like, I agree with you. I agree with you that McConnell is more shrewd about how he goes about his work. That's why I think, and I would argue, right, that if in 2013, this is my major point here, if we hadn't escalated by making that carve out for the filibuster like we did, shrewd McConnell would have felt that the cost of doing the carve out and extending that carve out that now existed because of the Democrats. I don't think he would have made it into being. I don't think he would have pressed that button.
But your argument is McConnell won't break norms like the filibuster because he considers them politically costly. And I say, what's your basis for him not wanting to break norms because they're politically costly? And you said, well, look at 2020. But 2020 was a referendum on Trump, not McConnell. And not only are they two separate people, they go about things very differently. And in addition, you concede it wasn't the norms primarily. It wasn't, COVID and then norms. It was COVID norms. So to me, the argument doesn't follow. I don't see any basis. I don't see any persuasive evidence to suggest that Mitch McConnell would refuse. Because again, I would argue the fact that Trump got more votes from Republicans in 2020, despite COVID and despite the economic consequence, was because, and he touted this himself, this was a huge staple of his re-election. I got 2 Supreme Court justices confirmed, and I'm in the process of getting a third one, Amy Coney Barrett, in which he did before the election. And the only reason he can claim that is because he broke norms. So I would argue he gets rewarded. Republicans are politically rewarded by their base and by right-leaning moderates for breaking norms if it gets them the outcome they desire.
But
so not
again, in the system we work in, right? Like the Republican base is going to vote Republican. They're even again. This was a frustration, and you have Republican family. Like they've talked about this of doing these Supreme Court nominees for years, and they never followed through. And I again, it had become a meme right? Amongst my Republican friends, like, oh, they're just gassing us up. They're not ever going to really do this. But you know what? They still went to the ballot box and they still rewarded them for not doing shit about it, right? Like they still gave this reward to that. Again, you keep pointing to this higher vote turnout, and I would say that regardless of what Trump did or did not, he would have gotten a higher voter turnout simply because voter turnout was higher because of mail-in ballots, because access expanded to such an extent where it didn't matter, right? If they were trying to reward or punish Trump, more people would go to vote. What decides election, especially in a system like the Electoral College, where we can look at the millions of vote differences, that doesn't matter. It's the 70,000 votes in
In
Pennsylvania or the
swing states,
20,000 votes in Pennsylvania. It's
yes.
those and what those voters, right? And McConnell doesn't have to worry about this personally, but he does have to worry about this nationally. In the swing states, in the R+1 or the Dem +1s, the purple states,
Mm-hmm.
the margins matter. And what the margins are decided upon are the independents and the moderates and what they think and what they want to reward and what they want to punish. And those people, like it or not, seem to want to punish norm breaking.
I don't see where that's the case because again, 2020 was a referendum on COVID and the economy, not norm breaking. So you're citing an example of people punishing norm breakers, but the primary motivator wasn't the norm breaking; it was COVID and the economy. So we fundamentally disagree. I don't think that argument follows. But fair enough.
Fair enough. I mean, we'll move on because again, this is a fundamental difference. Just a final word is that on this at least is that people are going to punish him for COVID just across the board. Like no information voters, right, would punish him for COVID. I think. But.
Yeah. Again, sure, but
those aren't what decides the election, right? That wouldn't have swayed it either way. If the independents and the moderates had gone a different way. Different ballgame, right? We would be looking at President Trump 2020 to 2024.
Well, no, because I would argue that even high information voters would still have sufficient basis to vote against Trump because of his management of COVID and the economy. I said yes because I agree that low information voters would be their basis, but I also think that that's also a primary reason for high information voters too. I don't think that's the exclusive province of low information voters. So we don't agree on that. But so getting back to it though, the idea of again that the Republicans didn't elect not to choose the filibuster carve out of the goodness of their heart or because they're that principled, but because they no longer had a need for it. And kind of like how I said earlier, it would be foolish for any group to just wholesale get rid of the filibuster because it is as you also made a compelling case for, it is a vitally important tool that Democrats themselves have made important use of.
Whichever party is not in power wants it.
100%. I completely agree. That's why so we're in total agreement there. And I think McConnell knows that. The reason that I don't foresee McConnell ever getting rid of the filibuster is because he knows it's a coin flip. Whether or not he ends up in the minority the next election cycle. So he'd be foolish to take that weapon and throw it off the table. But the other thing is this is not a turn-based RPG or a board game. McConnell had the option. It's not like he couldn't have done, because you said it earlier that, it enabled him to change the rules himself in 2017. But the thing is, it didn't. He could have changed the rules whenever he wanted, kind of like when he
do you think it would have been just as easy? Honestly, do you think it would have just politically? I'm just like to sell it both to his base and to the public as a whole. Do you think it would have been just as easy for him to do it if the Democrats hadn't done it in 2000?
It may or may. I mean, I could see it being a harder sell for Republican voters, but he was able. But he was also he didn't need to get their support to do it when he did it because he was already in the majority. He didn't have to say, "Hey guys, we can do this nuclear option. What do you all think?" They'd already won that last election cycle and they were still in the majority in the Senate. So whether or not the public approved or whether or not it would have been easier to cite the precedent set by the Democrats, he still had the option to do it because he had the votes in the Senate. So I don't buy that. But I do agree with you. It's always easier to justify escalation by pointing to the last person. You know, if you hit me and I hit you back, it's going to be easier for you to be like, hey, this guy just hit me, as opposed to you hitting me 2 times in a row. You know what I mean? Like, that's, of course, I agree with you there. But you look at well, let me ask you, do you think that Republicans only violate norms when Democrats do it first?
No.
Okay.
No, obviously not. It would be a silly argument to make. But in this particular instance, right, I think that the Democrats escalated when they didn't need to, so I blame them. And I also blame Mitch because he didn't need to escalate further. He just didn't need to, but he did it anyway, right? So both of these actions I cast aspersions on. And while, yes, to be kind of go full circle here, I think the Republicans are worse, right? What is current is it's the Democrats calling for further carve-outs of the filibuster, right? The Republicans are not, because they're not in power, right? So obviously they wouldn't. They're using it now. But what is current discussion, and I think this is important when it comes to how we frame things and how we discuss things, is to keep in mind the present context of why we're discussing these things and why we're talking about these things. And I think pointing to 2013 and showing the Democrats today who may have forgotten, right? Saying, hey, there's real danger here that it's not going to stop where we stop it, and saying if we do any carve-outs for, say, voting rights, that was bandied about, right? To enshrine voting rights or enshrine Roe v. Wade or these things, that's not where it's going to stop. And we don't need to give the ammunition to the Republicans in the future. And while they may do it anyway, it's possible, it's going to be harder for them if we do not do the carve-out first.
I disagree that it would be meaningfully harder. It may be, they might get asked tougher questions like, why did you do this without provocation? But I don't think it would stop them or cost them in any meaningful way. The fact that they might experience tougher questions, or it might take them an extra 60 seconds to either deflect in their answer or to justify it, like they did when they denied Merrick Garland a SCOTUS hearing. That they weren't responding to anything. But hang on, they did it anyway, and they were asked tough questions, and it was a hard sell for a lot of people. Like, what? This is unheard of, but they did it anyway. So I again agree that perhaps on the whole there would be some difference of doing a thing without provocation as opposed.
Let me ask you this.
Sure.
Let me ask you this. Why do you think Sinema and Manchin opposed even Biden as the administration, and all 48 other Democrats were saying we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this?
Because
what do you think was the reason those people in very purple states said no?
They're not. Well, Sinema State is purple, but West Virginia is not.
Red leaning when it comes to
because Manchin. They are, especially Manchin. He is the only meaningful like elected Democrat in West Virginia, and his popularity is correlated with how much he defies Biden. For example, right now, a poll came out a couple of days ago. His poll numbers aren't looking too good because he's looking as being too close with the president. So number one, he has a political incentive to be defiant and to be dissident, as does Sinema to a lesser extent, but she does. Plus, you could take some of what they say at face value, I don't see why not, and say that they believe in bipartisanship, perhaps to a fault.
They're going to say all sorts of shit, so let's take that out of the way.
So well, no, but it's entirely, say what?
Let's focus on the incentives, right?
Okay.
Because this is the core of my point, right? So if, for whatever reason, I'm wrong about us holding the Senate, okay, and we get a 52-48 Senate with, we got 2 Republican senators now that are in very purple areas. Do you not think that they will have the same incentives to maybe take a beat and perhaps push back against their Republican leadership?
Yeah,
McConnell,
wait,
right?
I'm sorry. If
So Cinema wants
Because I thought you said
right?
keep the Senate. That we would keep two
No,
more.
I
Okay.
misphrased it. If that's what I said, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Okay.
I misspoke. No, if Republicans took back the Senate, right, and suddenly now we have 52-48, and the Republican Mitch McConnell, because he's as you say, wants to disable institutions, says, you know what, we got this. I feel comfortable with it now, since we'll have two years unopposed here. Let's get rid of the filibuster, right? I think, in my theory here, is that the same incentive structures that existed for Manchin and Cinema would also exist for the swing state purple Republicans to stand up against McConnell and M-words, right? Stand up against McConnell and say, you know what? Actually, we're not going to let you do this, right? So it isn't even so much the fact that McConnell, is willing to do this or not willing to do this. Is the Republicans as a whole, what incentives there? Now, if Democrats had made that further carve out, if they had successfully carved out for voting rights, I don't think that incentive exists in such a strong way. I think the incentives goes away in a lot of ways for those purple state Republicans, right? I think those purple state Republicans now have a much better argument to give to their constituency and say, "Hey, we're just punching back. This is just self-defense, gang." And I think that sells to the public in these kind of states.
So, well, number one, I don't think that McConnell will try to abolish. I don't think he would, even if he does take the Senate in November. I don't think he would try to abolish the filibuster because, again, I think he knows that it's a tool that's best left on the table. Now, I imagine he will be more open to carve-outs than he previously was, and he will cite the calls by Democrats to make carve-outs. But if he wins in November, Biden is still president. So actually, he has more incentive to filibust, or to make use of of these things because
the tools, yeah.
yeah, because like he has more incentive to preserve them, rather, excuse me, because he's the one in the majority, right? He has more incentive to get rid of them or to make more carve-outs, for them, because Biden.
I get you with the Biden.
Yeah,
I get
because
you with the Biden thing, but let's
yeah,
extend it 2 years to 2024, right? Unfortunately, Biden loses and we get DeSantis, right?
yeah.
And the Republicans, again, same scenario, 52-48, because again, those same incentive structures would exist for the states, not so much McConnell. McConnell's incentives are different now, right? Because he no longer has a president to block him, right? He now has every incentive, if he wanted, to carve outs for the filibuster. Now, I don't think he does that because of the reasons you mentioned. I think he recognizes the power of the tool for the minority party, and he recognizes that they're not always going to be majority. He's wise like
Right,
I think that's true. But if, and here's my point here, if the Democrats had successfully made that carve out in 2022 or 2021, suddenly he has much more incentives to further and extend that carve out because he knows that, it's just going to be done anyway. So if it's going to break, we want to be in charge when it fully breaks.
Well, again, number one, I don't think carve-outs can be legislation, bill by bill by bill by bill. I don't think McConnell will ever go to break the filibuster. I don't think so. So I think that we both agree on that, and let's set that aside. What they wanted to do in 2005, and McConnell was in the Senate, he wasn't minority or majority leader. I can't remember who his predecessor was, but they were already discussing invoking.
Crying guy. I remember he cried a lot. Or was it Newt Gingrich? No, that was the House.
Gingrich was Speaker of the House during the Clinton years.
It was. What's his name? He works for a weed company now.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Anyway, I can't remember. But they already talked about doing exactly what you did, or what you just proposed 17 years ago. The only reason they didn't do a carve out then was because they won the next midterms and didn't need to. So if you're asking me, hey, in 2024, do you think McConnell might go for some carve-outs? Well, yeah, because they came close to doing it 17 years ago when it was politically expedient, and then when the context changed and they didn't need to, they set it aside. So yeah, I would say that if in 2024 it's politically beneficial for them to carve out the filibusters, make certain filibuster exceptions. Yeah. Yes, I do think they will.
I disagree because I think that again, in the world we find ourselves now, I think that McConnell knows if he does this, it creates a slippery slope where the Democrats, when they do lose power, will do it. And I think that he is concerned about that, rightfully so, right? Because we absolutely would if Republicans made carve-outs in 2024. Next time we get control, we're doing it too. It's just gonna happen. There's no way. Like even Manchin at this point signs off for something like that, right? If he's still in office at that point in time. So when we look at the year 2007, filibusters weren't used to nearly the extent that they are now. Like the use of the filibuster by both parties has escalated to astronomical levels. Like it was bad in Obama, it got worse in Trump, and in Biden's time, it's on track, right? Like we're gonna break some records here, right? So I just don't think that the context and the environment is the same where the same calculus happens. I think that at this point, right, without that individual state incentive structures in place for swing state senators to say no, right? Because when you say, I don't think McConnell will break the filibuster, I would argue that any carve-out breaks the filibuster. Any legislative carve-out will absolutely break the legislative
they view it as fundamentally different. There's a difference between abolishing the filibuster where it's no longer a tool at all that can be used, and like everything else, where it is there, you can just make certain carve-outs, but that's
carve-outs make it toothless.
That's like a ship of Theseus thing to me. Sure. So, but I would argue again in 2005, no. Yes, relatively it has escalated, but in 2005, it was for its time already escalated. Like they weren't considering just making a filibuster carve out just apropos of nothing. They felt they were being filibustered to an unprecedented degree, and so that's what prompted the dialogue in the first place. Then again, they didn't set it aside on principle. They set it aside on political expediency, where the midterms got them the seats they needed, that they no longer needed to consider a carve out, and so they set it aside. Then Obama wins 2 terms, and they take that escalation, and I mean it just shoots straight up to the point that by the time Obama left office, fully half of the number of blocks and filibusters in legislative history occurred under his administration. 2 terms. Like, that wasn't just continuing the rate. Republicans took it, and it went straight up. It was vertical.
Certainly, but that trend continued. Like, it's not like the Democrats didn't slow it down. Like, it's not like the Democrats slowed it down. I mean, they're like, you take an inch, we're going to take, like, so the Democrats took an inch, Republicans took a mile, the Democrats then took a league, or what, I don't know, right? Like 100 miles. And then the Trump Republicans, right, or the current Republicans are looking to take it even further, right? This is a huge escalation on all sides. And all I'm arguing for, all I'm advocating for, all I'm asking for, someone needs to stop escalating.
I agree, and it needs to be Republicans. That's the problem. Like the one who's doing most. I
don't have any control over what Republicans do, but I have influence. I have some influence over the Democratic Party in a way I don't with Republicans.
Well, a couple of things. Number one, I'm going to go back to the self-defense thing. If you have a friend who's in a physical altercation, and somebody hits him, and then he hits back, and then the person who hit him first and whom he hit back hits him again, and now they're on the ground. You have more influence over your friend. You can probably persuade your friend to stop fighting sooner than the aggressor.
I'll hold him back, and I won't do that to the enemy, right? Like, I wouldn't pull the enemy off because he's going to hit me too, right?
But if you're holding him back and he's still getting hit,
well, then I stop holding it back, obviously.
That's right? The thing, though. That's exactly what you're advocating for effectively. There is no limiting principle with the modern Republican Party. They've not shown it. And
if you really believe this, right? If you really believe what you're saying here, this justifies anything, right? Because if our argument here is that whatever we do is in self-defense because the Republicans are going to do it worse,
I didn't.
this justifies almost anything.
No, I don't, because there is this notion in self-defense of
reciprocity.
Well, yeah, but it's the
Matching energy.
comparable. Yeah, let's just use that. There's like a legal term for it, but like if somebody hits you in the face, you do not, in the notion of self-defense.
Stab him 20 times in.
Yes.
Yeah.
So no, I disagree. It doesn't justify everything. What it does justify is a comparable, like a not an escalate, but a comparable rate of response.
And
so
that's the fundamental disagreement we have. I do not think the 2013 carve-outs by Harry Reid were comparable responses to what was going on. I think it was absolutely an escalation.
How was it an escalation when that was the only this isn't so. Reid was in the majority. The president has a constitutional right to fill executive and judicial vacancies. He has a right to do it. They were blocking and filibustering, not just voting them down, per se.
I understand. Mm-hmm.
And to an unprecedented extent. What was Harry Reid's option? You say, get better candidates. That means conservative candidates.
In some cases, unfortunately, you have to make a compromise to get things done unless you want to make these kind of carve-outs.
Ceding to the minority is not a... If you and I... If I'm Harry Reid, or no, let's give you're Harry Reid, and I'm Mitch McConnell,
Sure.
and you not only have the majority, but the Cherry is president. President Cherry says, okay, I want to fill these executive and judicial vacancies. And you're like, got it, Madam President. And you put forth all kinds of appointments, appointees, and nominees, and I go, nope, 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 nope. You want to fill it? You got to use my guy. That's not a compromise.
What is a compromise, however, is say, hey, we want these seats, right? And we understand that politically you want us to throw you a bone. So we will give you this appointee and this appointee if you let us have these others, right? We enter a conversation at this point because, as you point out, right, and you pointed out in the Twitter exchange we had, they didn't block all of our appointments, right? They blocked a lot of them, but they didn't block all of them. And
they didn't block the most. They didn't block the most conservative choices. I agree with you that if Harry Reid had offered conservative appointments, that McConnell would have been likely.
But he didn't have to offer all of the appointments to be conservative. He only had to give them, like, it's this, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. Now, again, I don't know if he would have accepted it, right? I don't know. But before using the nukes, right, he should have at least tried.
If McConnell...
My recollection here, right, is that they didn't go with that, right? There was a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, a lot of hand-wringing back and forth, but at the end of the day, Harry Reid was in charge, and he decided to use it.
Yes, as far as I know, Harry Reid did not offer conservative appointments beyond the ones that McConnell already agreed to fill. But this is where we just fundamentally disagree, because what I hear is, let Republicans hold you hostage. Pick people that they want. They want conservatives. Then what's the point of the point of the president filling the vacancies isn't to just put an ass in a chair. It's to put the right ass in the chair, aligned with the president's values and the party's the majority party's ideas. To cede that to the minority is to let the minority dictate the president's agenda. We fundamentally disagree on that.
Sure. And we only got 10 more minutes here.
Sure.
I have to go, but this has been a really interesting
I agree. It's been very good.
Right? So I guess I'll ask you this before we go into our closings here. Do you think it is ever appropriate to cede ground to the opposition when it comes politically? Do you think it's ever appropriate to let them have anything? Or do you think we should just shut them out entirely? If we have 51 seats, right, should we be able to entirely shut them out of any political...
No, because otherwise I would be advocating for abolishing the filibuster.
But when it comes to appointments, too, right? Do you not think that they should have any say?
No, because yes, I do think they should have say, which is why I didn't have an issue with Obama teeing up nominees that Republicans could vote for. Garland himself, like I said, I want to make this very clear. Obama was hardly this commie socialist cramming far leftists into crucial vacancies. I know you're not saying that, but my point is this idea that if they had just picked a more centrist candidate, I mean, who knows what would have happened? Merrick Garland was seen by pretty much every judicial scholar as a middle-of-the-road, by-the-book centrist, like this just anodyne, milquetoast centrist, and they still refused him because it was politically expedient to do so. So, yes, I agree in ceding some things to the minority and having them involved. That's why I don't support abolishing the filibuster. It's why I didn't wag my finger at Obama for not cramming, far-left commie socialists in every vacancy. But I do not believe in allowing the minority to dictate the agenda, and certainly not when the minority is Republicans. So as far as when and where to cede the ground, you got to do it in good faith. But the other problem is good faith has to be reciprocal. If you and I are having a good faith conversation here, and I've loved it. This has probably been my favorite conversation that I've had. And again, I've had some with Tavtaj and Destiny or whatnot. It's just been like two dudes chatting, two politics geeks chatting. Yeah, no, it's okay.
Gas me up more. I'm here for it.
But yeah, anyway, but if I was acting in bad faith and you were acting in good faith, do you know what we would have? A bad faith conversation. One party acting in good faith does not a good faith circumstances create. By definition, it has to be reciprocal. And the Republican Party does not behave reciprocally in good faith. They are not a loyal opposition party. They're just not. Sometimes they do. I mean, obviously, I don't want you to take it to absurd degrees. There are times, sure. But they are not a reliably good faith party, and certainly not as good faith as Democrats are. So, yeah, I as far as ceding to Republicans, I feel like Republicans have to do some work on their front before I'd be comfortable ceding much to them. Hey, isolate and kick out your extremist elements. Hey, help us punish those extremist elements. Demonstrate that you are willing to, renew faith in institutions. Stop saying the election was stolen. Punish those who say it was. Don't back them.
McConnell has, right? Like McConnell at least has, on that note, I think demonstrated. Pence too. Surprise, right? I thought, oh man, Pence isn't. But no, say what you will about the man, but in that instance, he showed a lot of courage.
Yeah, I agree that he acted. I don't think he's a hero or anything, and I'm sure you don't either. But yes, I'm happy that he made that decision.
We shouldn't take away the good just because in general he's
no, I don't take it away. But I just, to me, I try to strike that line between like Pence and Cheney and Kinzinger. I'm happy that they've done what they've done, but I'm also, number one, I think that's the bare minimum we should expect of our elected representatives for upholding their oath to office, number one. But number two, they backed Trump until the last possible moment, and Trump was very obviously, like you talked about Mitt Romney earlier. I agree with you. In 2012, yeah, I voted for Obama, but I wasn't worried about if he lost what the country would look like because Romney was a statesman, even if I disagreed with him. Trump was clearly not. Clearly a bad faith actor from the beginning, a liar and a narcissist and a buffoon. So the fact that they couldn't see that coming, to me, it's like you should require adult supervision at all times if you really couldn't see that.
Yeah. A lot of the people who voted for Trump, right? It was a fireball that they threw into the system because they just did not trust the system. They wanted the system gone.
Sure, but I hold I hold Republican voters to a different standard than Republican politicians. You know what I mean? The politician should know better.
Okay. I hate to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I'd love to continue because I have again substantive disagreements on this idea of how we should treat people like Cheney and Pence when they do finally, do the right thing.
Right.
I think that we should be quick to lionize them because we want to hold them up as role models for the rest of the Republican Party. But that's a discussion for another day, right? I think that it has been great. I will post your TikTok link again.
Yeah,
and I'm gonna follow.
And I'm gonna do this when I record. So I've been recording this. When I put this on YouTube, I'm gonna have all your information as well, and would encourage everybody watching to follow Death of Certainty. He loves two things about Death of Certainty. Whick here, John Whick. Number one, he loves feet gifs. Just inundate him with feet gifs. Number one, loves it. Number two, he loves puns. Just drown him in puns.
I unironically do love the puns.
Wait.
Not the feet shit.
Oh, but
Unironically, not the feet shit, but the
Your OnlyFans says different.
Oh, my only beard, you mean? That's what I have. Like tier three subs to Death of Certainty channel gets Daddy ASMR, Daddy Wick ASMR. Go check it out. Anyway, gang. So what we got coming up, right? What do we have coming up? Tomorrow we're gonna have Ica Rich. We're gonna have V Radio. We're gonna have the Phoenix Diva. We're gonna have Corey Campbell and Polly People. And we're going to be talking about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion when it comes to academia. It should be fun. Check it out. 6 p.m. Eastern. Monday, we're going to talk about Ukraine some more. 6 p.m. Eastern. Haven't gotten a full list yet for that. But Wednesday's a big one, gang. Wednesday's what you want to tune in for. 6 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. Not a normal day I stream, but I'm making an exception here. We got Sansol. We got Cherry. We got Not Eli Monty. We got the Pyro Tyrant. We got Polly People. We got Pyram Kai. They're all coming on my show. And we're going to discuss black integration and black racism and what that is. Purity testing. What's it like when it comes to racial issues? Let's see. Gang, for now, we're going to raid out into Katie Doe. We haven't seen her streaming. So,
thanks, everybody.
Yeah, give him a follow. Thanks. But yeah, wait, bye-bye.
Hey, you. Yeah, you. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, and I hope that you did, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe. Also, my link tree is in the description below, so if you have a sec, go ahead and share the love on all my social media accounts. Also, if you want to express an opinion, eternal devotion, or undying contempt, go ahead and leave a comment because we're always looking for feedback. And on that note, I look forward to pondering politics and pop culture again with you very soon.